It is a great honor and privilege to introduce Margo Pinsk Kestenbaum. We're here in your beautiful apartment in Jerusalem. And Margo, you have such an amazing history, how you landed up in the Philippines, being born in Germany. So if you can tell us a little bit about your family and how you landed up going to the Philippines.
Yes, my parents, of course, both came from Germany, and I was born in the town of Breslau.
In what year?
In 1931. And the earliest memories I have are in an apartment which we had in Breslau, and looking out the window, we had a park across the way, and we had no television, so entertainment was mother and me leaning out the window and watching what went by. And when I had a birthday, my 5th or 6th birthday, there was a huge march of soldiers and swastikas and singing, marching past our door. And I said, wow, everybody is celebrating my birthday. And it was the 30th of January. And it was a meaningful day in the history of the German Reich. I think, I do not now remember, it is an important day. I think it was declared when Hitler took over the power and was voted in. Maybe it was Reichstag, and this was the reason for this parade. And the other thing I remember from those years was that we used to sit in the little park across the way on a bench that was facing our apartment building. And then came a time when it said Jews cannot sit on this bench. And at the same time, my family had to let go the help that they had in the house. My mother and father had established a business, first in the early years in the 1930s, and in my very early childhood years, my father worked for a department store, Tietz, and he was let go. And in those years, the Jews thought, okay, this will pass. So he started his own business, and mother began working with him in the business. And they made aprons and house dresses. And they then manufactured them in the city. Mother cut the patterns in the store, and they had a wholesale business. And then my father traveled into the provinces to sell the dresses, and that seemed to hold on okay until one day one of his customers, because Breslau is in the border of, now it is Poland, a border of Poland, one of his customers said, Mr. Castle, the time has come for you to leave. Things look very, very bad for the Jews. And of course, we had already experienced my father's dismissal, and we had to let the lady go who was taking care of me, and an old woman was hired in her place. My parents had difficulty with making a living, so they rented out one of the rooms. And little by little, after this customer warned my father became actively interested in leaving Breslau. There was a group of friends, two brothers, and my father had his brother living in Breslau as well. And it was decided that the 4 families would emigrate together wherever they would go. they went from consulate to consulate and were always told no. I'm talking of the year 1938. And one day my father came home and said, we have a possibility to emigrate to the Philippine Islands. It was the first place that accepted us, was prepared to accept us. And so that's what we agreed to. And preparations were made. The apartment was sold. He had a very wealthy, well-placed cousin in Breslau by the name of Lippmann, who was a senior justice in Breslau. And so they thought they were very safe. And the night before we left, gave us a goodbye party and made even fun of us, saying, you're crazy, you're going to play where elephants are in the streets, and made many jokes. And I am sad to tell you that most of them have been murdered in the Holocaust because they thought their positions would save them. And in the meantime, we landed in the Philippines.
Can I ask you, before you discuss about the Philippines, growing up, do you remember the school you went to?
In Germany?
In Germany?
Yes, I went to a school, was run by Frau Wohl. Frau Wohl had a kindergarten, which we attended, was Jewish. And I have even a picture of us on Purim on the refrigerator. I'll show you. At this point, I want to mention also that since my father and his brother were close and decided to emigrate together, they had a daughter my age. So I have an almost twin cousin who grew up with me, whose name is Lottie.
And did you have any siblings?
What?
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
No, I was alone. Lottie had an older brother. And when they left before us, but they went to the Philippines also.
And your house, was it a traditional Jewish house?
It was what the Americans would consider a traditional conservative house. It was not Reform and it was not Orthodox.
And did you remember going to the synagogue to...
Yes, very much so. My father on Friday nights would take me to some shtibel, which I remember. And I remember that I think by age 3 I could do the Birkat Hamazon.
And your mother lit candles?
What?
Your mother lit candles for Shabbat?
Oh, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Of course.
So it was more traditional.
We had a Shabbat, we had a kosher house, and that was it. All of this was packed up.
And what happened with your grandparents?
What?
What happened to your grandparents?
Okay. My father had a very long history. That's a whole movie in itself. But his stepmother, she survived in Theresienstadt, and I have in her handwriting 5 letters that we received after she was let out of the concentration camp. But coming back, we were very fortunate that we were admitted to the Philippines.
And on your mother's side, did she have parents? Did you have grandparents?
My mother was a convert, and her parents had to go in hiding as well because they were described as Jew parents.
Really?
But they survived. They survived the heavy carpet bombing of the Ruhr Valley. She came from the Ruhr Valley.
So because their daughter converted, they were regarded
So I remember that we visited them after the war, and we would go into the marketplace, and my grandmother, who was a very proud lady, would say, "Don't look right, don't look left, we'll only buy where I tell you to." Because people had discriminated against them.
Just because their daughter had converted?
Yes. So that was the story, and that's how we got to the Philippines.
And what are your memories of when you left Germany? Do you remember going on the boat? Or
I have very, very strong memories. One memory is that on the dining room table were piles of clothes, and my mother had bought clothing that would suit the Philippines, and my father said, "Look at Margaret's pile, look at mine, where are all your clothes?" And so anyway, the mother was always a very modest person. I remember her crying as they began carrying out furniture that they were selling. It was hard for her, apparently.
And can I ask, when you were growing up, did you experience any anti-Jewish feeling, any anti-Semitism?
Well, first of all, I was in a Jewish kindergarten and then in a Jewish school for 2 years. The anti-Semitism was the fact that we couldn't sit on the bench that was obviously in front of us. We couldn't go to the park. There was a very large, beautiful park that the four families, the two brothers and their families would meet, and we would walk and so forth, and that was not allowed for Jews. So the solution of the Jewish community was that they rented there was a farm area outside of Breslau, and we rented little booths, little houses, little huts from that farm, and the Jews would on Sundays take trains out there and spend Sunday in a picnic style in those little huts in beautiful area with berries growing around and really beautiful memories. That's when I picked gooseberries and blueberries and strawberries, and the memories from that were very, very positive. The negative things were, first of all, besides not going to the park, for me as a child, going to the farm was much more fun. But what I experienced was the housekeeper that while my mother was helping my father, the housekeeper was a real anti-Semite. And one of the sad stories, or funny in a way, was that I was brought home by the Ganenet, by the kindergarten teacher, and the housekeeper hated her. So when the Ganenet brought me home, this nasty housekeeper said, "What did she say about me?" And I said that you are an ugly, not nice person, and I called her all kinds of names, which of course wasn't true. And then I got into bed, because every time I did something wrong or broke something, I would climb into bed, and when my parents came from work, they would find me in bed. And so they came home and asked the housekeeper, "Why is she in bed?" And the housekeeper said, "Because she said these and these and these things." And my parents closed the door and said, "We'll take care of her." But instead they hugged each other, and they were so proud of me. because I had told off this anti-Semitic woman. You know, the other thing was that I heard the radio on, and I heard the raving voice of Hitler. And my father would say, I see very bad, dark days ahead. You know, this is when you asked me, what did I experience? The other funny incident was when my father got fired. My mother and I came to take Dad home the day, and my father introduced us to his boss, and I said, "Are you the man that's so nasty to my father?" Anyway, which was very embarrassing, of course. But so the kind of anti-Semitism I personally experienced was not all directed at me, but it was there, of course.
And did you see Hitler Youth in the streets, or did you ever see swastikas, flags?
Well, of course, there were swastikas everywhere.
And the Hitler Youth, did you ever see the...
And what?
The Hitler Youth, did you ever see them walking in the streets?
I had no experience with Hitler Youth at all, no.
And when you heard that you're going to the Philippines, did you feel excited, like you were going on an adventure?
For me, it didn't mean anything at the time. We boarded ship. Before that, there was a trauma because we were standing on the dock ready to board ship, and suddenly my father identified our boxes still on the dock, and so my father ran to someone in charge and said, "Look, our belongings are still here." So they obviously had forgotten them, so they put them into the nets, you know, the nets that pick up the goods and put them into the storage of the ship. And so they were in a hurry. They picked them up and they slammed against the side of the ship, and my mother dissolved in tears and said, "There won't be a thing that won't be broken. All our dishes, everything." And this was a trauma. It was true. When the boxes arrived, there was not a piece that wasn't broken. So that was a trauma, the side product of this horrible emigration experience.
And what year did you go to the Philippines? Or
we
what
left
date?
in November 38.
Was it November 38? Wow.
What?
November 38, that was...
It was November, and Kristallnacht, we were already on board ship.
So you missed Kristallnacht. That was
we were on board ship.
It was the beginning of November.
But I have the handwritten description of Kristallnacht from my grandmother, from my step-grandmother, but still grandmother. And she describes the horrible thing that happened.
So you missed it by a few days, literally a few days.
And this grandmother lived in a town called Thorn, Thorn, which was east. And from there, she was taken to Theresienstadt.
And she survived.
And she survived. She survived because of an exchange that took place that had been negotiated with Switzerland. And so her first letter to us was from Switzerland. In 1945, her October, that was her first letter to us. And we were already after the war. And
so can I ask, when you were about to leave to go to the Philippines, Did you say goodbye to your school friends and your neighbors?
Not to my school friends, but I had a very dear friend across the street. Her name was Helga. I don't remember her last name. And my mother said, go say goodbye to Helga. And I went. And her father was a physician. And when I came to say goodbye, the grandmother called me into her room and she hugged me and cried and said, I wish we were going. But the doctor had forbidden Helga to play with me ever since he found out that we were leaving, because he thought this was all passing. So I don't remember their last name now. But Helga and her family unfortunately stayed.
And then,
you know,
they didn't survive?
Did not survive. At some point, I took my my children, my biological children, back to Germany, and we went to Breslau, and there in front of the synagogue that did not get destroyed is a big space, a lawn. And there's a sign that says, here is where they collected the Jews before sending them off. And I stood there and cried. I said, if not for the Philippines, I would have been there. You know, it was a very fortunate thing that we were able to go there.
Like a miracle that your father had it's like he had a premonition that things were going to get worse.
Yeah, well, there were quite a few of us that made it to the Philippines.
And leaving Germany, were you upset to leave, or?
No, I was just funny that you should ask. I'm today 92, and I keep having this dream, and finally I concluded it must be my dream of the houses that we left in Germany, because it's a dream where I go and they are rebuilding houses and I'm looking at the houses, and then finally today and it's a dream that comes back and back and back, and then I said, why? And I figured, I remember that when we first came to the Philippines, I thought about the beautiful streets and the clean streets compared to what we were living in the Philippines. I mean, the Philippines, Manila was a beautiful city, and still, you know, where we lived in the neighborhoods we lived, you had dirt paths. It wasn't paved. The main streets, of course, were paved, but where we were, wasn't. It was a different world. On the other hand, my cousin Lottie and I were very excited about the fact that we were near the sea. We had never seen the ocean. And here at the end of the street, we made discoveries of the ocean and the life of shells and fish, and we spent a lot of time collecting shells and bringing things from the sea to our house. So part of being in the Philippines was very exciting for us.
So Mark,
children.
When you left Breslau, which port did you disembark from, or did you leave from?
No, we took a train to Marseille.
Oh, you went to Marseille.
And we took the ship, a French ship from Marseille.
And that ship went to the Philippines?
And that ship took us to Hong Kong.
First Hong Kong.
And in Hong Kong we changed ships. the big ships of the French lines did not go there. They ended in Hong Kong, and from there we moved to a smaller ship that took us across the China Sea.
It must have been a bit of an adventure. It was being on the ship.
It was and it wasn't, because I was very seasick a lot of the time.
And this is the first time you'd ever been on a ship?
Of course.
And you saw the ocean, and
I was 7 years old, and I guess the stopping at different ports was interesting, and that made an impression. I do remember stopping in, what was the Egyptian port Said, and we went off ship and we walked around, and then when we came back, my mother broke down for the first time and said, this is what we're going to. You know, anticipating what the Philippines would be like. Meaning, you know, this is now not Europe anymore. This is the Far East. And we went to, this was the Middle East, and we went to the Far East.
And I'm sure your apartment in Breslau must have been a lovely...
Excuse me?
I'm sure you lived in a beautiful apartment in Breslau. You had a beautiful apartment.
We had a beautiful apartment, yes. We had, you know, the memories that I have. In those days, you heated the house with coal. And there was in the living room a beautifully designed oven from floor to ceiling, all white, with beautiful curvatures of plants and flowers and things. And feeding that oven was a big part of heating the whole place. And so I remember that there was also the same kind of floor-to-ceiling oven in the bedroom, which was beautiful tiles. And that's how, those are some of the memories that I carry back from the apartment. We had a balcony that was next to a pear tree, and the pears grew, you know, you could pick them and eat them from the pear tree. So there were many memories.
And in the building that you lived, did you have nice neighbors? Did you have close neighbors?
Excuse me?
Did you have close neighbors? Were you friendly with your neighbors?
No, my parents did not keep close contact with the neighbors at all. The people from the Jewish community came from other apartments, like my uncle, my father's brother, and Lottie lived some streets over. And Jews were scattered throughout different apartment buildings, but we didn't have any contact. What did happen is the house lady who was in charge of the building had a daughter, and a real Nazi, you know, blonde eyes, blue eyes, blonde hair. I adored her. And she and I used to play together. And one day, her mother forbade her to play with me, and no more. And that I remember. And I could not get an answer from my parents. Why can't I play with her? You know, so when I think back now, that was an anti-Semitic experience, but I didn't see it as that. I just didn't understand what that was about.
And Margaret, do you remember what items you were able to take with you when you left? Did you have any toys or any dolls?
Oh, the big thing, first of all, I had dolls that I was doll crazy. So I had 2 dolls that were part of my life. But in the the packing, and then there was a doll carriage, which to me was the most important thing in the world. I couldn't wait for them to open the crates to see my doll carriage. And then Lottie and I would walk down the street with the doll carriage, and all the Filipino children after us. They'd never seen such a thing. Not the doll and not the doll carriage.
And that didn't break that stayed intact?
That didn't break, no.
So you managed to take some dolls with you, and did you take any other items?
Excuse me?
Did you take any other
toys
that you had, or
no, mostly the dolls. That was the center of. I don't remember any other toys that we took.
And do you recall when you left your home and you knew that you're not going to be coming back, or do you remember
that
the
moment?
day that
I don't remember. There was too much excitement about getting on the train and going to, I do remember when we went to the hotel in Marseille that I was very surprised to find a bathroom with 2 toilets, because I didn't know what a bidet was. That was another moment of interest for a young girl.
And can I ask, on the ship, what did you do during the day? How did you pass the time?
Well, when I was not sick in bed with seasickness, they had a lady who played games with the children.
And were there
from the shipping company?
Were there quite a few other Jews on the ship going to?
There was, to my knowledge, there was one boy, 8 years old. I was 7, he was 8. And he was traveling alone, and he was received by family that he did not know when we stopped in, it was a Indian port. Goodness, I don't remember the name. Djibouti? I think Djibouti. The name of the port was Djibouti. We stopped there, and here came this Indian family and took this boy off the ship. And it was family, obviously, and he had not known them. And my mother's heart broke over the fact that he had been sent ahead by himself. Afterwards, we have many stories like that, but this was our first.
And did you speak with him on the ship? Did you?
No, I wasn't even aware of him until the time came for him to get off. I didn't know he was traveling with us. So that was.
And when you came to the Philippines, what is your memories when you arrived?
Well, when we arrived, Lottie had already been there, and the first thing she did is take me to the end of the street where the ocean was.
So they came to see when you to welcome you.
They came to the boat to receive us because they'd been there already a month.
A month.
Yeah.
So that must have made it much easier.
Yeah. Yes, but the first place we stayed in was a boarding house run by a Jewish lady who'd come from Hong Kong. She opened up, she saw what was happening and that there were immigrants coming in and needing a temporary boarding place. And so Madam Collerman opened up this home. What is interesting is I've been back to the Philippines quite a number of times, but the last time I was there, I met the neighbor of Mrs. Collerman, an old lady, of course, also, and she remembers the immigrants coming. So that was really interesting. meeting her and so forth.
And when you arrived, how long did you stay in the temporary?
How what?
How long did you stay there before you went to your next apartment? Or
We stayed there. I'll tell you, there was a very clever Chinese family. My goodness, I now cannot think of their name. This family saw this huge area of land, and they developed, I think, 4 or 5, Tambuatko was their name. The Tambuatkos bought this entire area, large area, and built homes, street after street after street. And their method of building was a house, and then the same size of the house, there was a space of garden. And then there was the next house, and then again garden. And so there were 5, 6 streets, and the immigrants rented the houses that the Tambuatkos built because they were reasonable, obviously. And so we moved into that neighborhood, and it was 1 block from the sea. So obviously it was for us a very wonderful location. And between it and the sea was a main road, Harrison Avenue, and so that's where our first home was.
And was it near Manila, or is it
in Manila?
It's in a suburb of Manila.
In Manila, yes, it's part of Manila, in the neighborhood known as Pasay. And then my father at first he had no hair, so he went selling pomade house to house. No, the first place that they got taken in was by a Jew. Jews help Jews. There was a Mr. Maglen. Maglen was also from China, a Jew from China. Maglen had a auction store. Maglen bought off the ships that came to the Philippines. He bought what was left and auctioned it. And when the immigrants came, he took the immigrants and gave them jobs. So that's where my father and my uncle started, in Maglen's store. That gave him a chance to learn about the money, about the bank, about simple language that you use in business. And from Maglen's, my father decided he wanted to go on his own. And so he went to the Joint Jewish Distribution Committee, and he got a loan. And with that loan, he bought a car, and he went to the Chinese wholesale place in Manila and bought watches and buttons and all kinds of materials. He hired a Filipino as a driver, and the Filipino driver who knew the Philippines, and they began driving to the little provinces to sell. And that's how my father made his living. Now, parallel, my mother had been very foresightful and taken sewing lessons in Germany before we left in preparation. So she began sewing. She began to sew brassieres for the immigrant ladies, and she began to sew layettes for the babies that were being born. And she also went shopping for my father and would send him from the wholesale market. I remember wrapping big packages with her, which she took to the post office and sent to him while he was selling in the province. So this is how they made a living in the first years. And somewhere in 1940, 2 years later, a man was looking for a manager for his store. And my father applied, and he got the manager job. So he managed the store for this man who's turned out to be a Mr. Berg. Mr. Berg had come to the Philippines after World War I, when things were so very bad in Germany. And Mr. Berg married a very well-to-do lady and opened the 2 stores, of which one my father then managed. So that was by 1940, things were looking up. And then in 1941, the Japanese attacked.
Can I just ask, before we go, because that was a very momentous occasion, did you go to school when you first arrived in the Philippines?
When we first arrived, we went to a convent school known as Santa Scholastica. Why? Because my aunt, who was the one who was busy looking at what was available for us, again, I remind you, this was 2 brothers having come together. So my aunt went around looking for a school for Lottie and me, and she decided that here was a Catholic school with German-speaking nuns, and that would be perfect for us because the nuns would help us with the language. So Lottie and I were registered into the Santa Scholastica school. My aunt made a deal that we wouldn't have to pray, and the nuns said no problem at all. But, you know, you have 2 girls in 1st grade. When everybody is signing the cross, we said potato soup, potato soup, potato soup, potato soup. That was our way of dealing with Catholicism. We were in that school, and they gave us also lunch, and they were very friendly until 2nd grade. When we finished 2nd grade, and Lottie and I knew that we were way ahead of our classmates, the nun called us over and said, okay, 2 years you've been with us, we now have your rabbi take care of you, goodbye. And out we went. So two 9-year-old girls were thrown out of Catholic school.
Wow.
I guess they realized that what they hoped they could convert
It didn't happen.
And so...
And the other children, did you get on well with the other?
We got on very well. We had some in the neighborhood, and we visited them.
Were they mainly foreigners or?
No, Filipino people.
Filipino people.
And they were very lovely to us. And I have a memory that my parents didn't think anything of me walking over to Lottie in the dark or Lottie coming to me. We were on streets. And these people also lived. But when it came time to get home and it was dark, they wouldn't let us alone. They said, you can't go alone. They didn't let their children out after dark. We never
thought of it.
You know, as newcomers who thought that there was a danger at all.
And the medium, was it in German that you had the school, or did they speak any English? Or
the nuns spoke. It was an English school, and I remember that there was only one word I didn't understand, and that was the word sentence. Never forgot that. It was the only word I could not understand. Otherwise, Lottie and I picked up English. I don't know how, but we picked it right up.
And the nuns were German?
The nuns were a German order.
And did they have any anti-Semitic, did they show any anti-Semitism or?
No, none.
None whatsoever. Wow.
Just two little girls that Jesus loved.
And when they saw that they weren't progressing and you're not converting, then they said it's time to go. So what happened when you left?
When we left, my auntie again went around looking, and she found the place called the Philippine Women's University. The Philippine Women's University was an institution run by women for women. It was a very, as far as the Philippines, a very, how shall I say, prestigious institution. And when my aunt approached them, they were only too happy to give us free education and free busing. They were wonderful. Lottie and I entered 3rd grade there. And the kids were wonderful, the teachers were wonderful, the principal was magnificent and sensitive. I will give you an example. We did a lot of cultural Filipino dancing and singing. And then one day the principal said, okay, now you will teach us these dances, and she played waltzes for us to teach the children. When I think back, it was a real sensitive kind of behavior on their part. The people and the kids would try and share lunches with sandwiches or whatever they brought from home, and wanted us to taste what mothers made and things. They were wonderful, the kids and the teachers.
And you never experienced, did they know you were Jewish?
Of course.
But you never experienced anti-Semitism? Or?
No, and neither was it religious. Mm-hmm. You know, they were Catholics, but...
And did you make a lot of Filipino friends?
Well, at that point we did, but in the end it was Lottie and me. We were like twins.
Inseparable.
Absolutely. All the pictures there are still of Lottie and me at 80 and at 1.5 years.
Wow.
And we're still in
Where does she live?
Lottie lives in West Hartford, Connecticut. So anyway, that was the Philippines. And here's my father in the store that he managed.
If I can just have a look, I'll just show.
Here he is in the store.
This is in the Philippines.
Yeah.
And your father's, wow, it's only with ladies. Yeah. And you have a picture of your parents?
Yeah, I showed you. Oh,
if I can
here,
show
my
it.
mother and father. In my father's office.
Can I ask you, during this time, did your mother or your father ever say, we regret that we left Germany?
Never.
Did they never have regrets?
Never.
Wow.
My mother was, of course, very concerned about mail. And we got very little. And after the war, only with the help of the Red Cross could we find her parents. And my step-grandmother, she wrote, but my parents, mother and father, could not find us. But we, through the Red Cross, found them.
And did you know at all what was happening in Europe and in Germany?
No, and we did not know what was happening. At least, as a child, I did not know. And I have to also tell you that my parents never talked about it. I did not know about the Holocaust. It was not talked about. The first I learned about the Holocaust was when my mother had gotten sick, and I was, at the age of 16, had to bring her, this is after the war, after we survived. And we survived a brutal, brutal war in the Philippines, in Manila. If you want to, I'll go into it, but it was they burnt down the entire city of Manila, which was the pearl of the Orient. They destroyed everything. And the nights we saw, the sky was red night after night after night, because when they learned that they were losing, they wanted a scorched earth policy. Anyhow, we survived. And my father went back to the business. He, in his mind, when he saw the city burn, said, I will bring in the materials that they will need. And he found the same man who had hired him, and he made him a business plan, and they went into business. And this is the result of it. So that was, anyway, when I was 16, Mother got ill. She'd been ill. That's the early part of my life. My mother got TB when I was 5 months old, and she was sent to Switzerland. And we had a housemaid that took care of me. You know, today, when I think about it, there were 2 grandmothers, but my father didn't turn to them. And he kept the housekeeper who took care of me for 2 years. And my mother was for 2 years in Switzerland, and I didn't see her again. I first met her when I was 2. So anyhow, whatever had bothered her in 1946 reappeared. She coughed and was in a bad way, and the lung specialist said she has to go to the United States for surgery. And my father had just begun the business, so he said, you will go with her. So at 16, I took my mother to the United States, to Los Angeles, and from the airport, a ambulance took my mother to the hospital. And I, that night, went home with a nurse, and the next day I went looking for Jews. I needed a place to stay. So first I looked in the newspaper, and there was an ad near the hospital. And it sounded good and reasonable, so I rented a room and found that another lady was sharing my room. Anyway, it turned out to be a red light district. We didn't know. But I then found I had a Magen David that had broken, and I looked for a store where I saw Kiddush cups and things. And in that store, it was run by Jews, and I told them my story. And they said, we have an organization called the Council of Jewish Women, and they will find you a good Jewish home, and they did. Anyway, at this point I was in the States. I don't know if you want me to go on. It's a whole lot.
No, it's, did your mother recover?
Yes, my mother had, I myself at 16, you know, when I think of the chutzpah.
You were so young.
First of all, I landed in an
country.
Orthodox home where I learned how to really daven. I did not know. I knew that, you know, to follow, but to really daven. The lady of the house told me it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. They had a daughter my age, and I joined at that point Hashomer Hadati. That's when I learned about Zionism. Anyway, that was an experience that was very interesting, because I also at 16 went to the Ministry of Education and said, I want to be where I can reach my mother every day. I want a school that's located that way. And I went to the Los Angeles High School, because by law I should have been in the school next to where I was living, but as I said, I arranged for my own education. And so I went to that school, and I had a wonderful living experience with this family, Finkelstein. It was very special. And I stayed with them right until Pesach, when my mother recovered. My mother from hospital went out to a rehabilitation place where I visited her every day after school. And that was fine.
Your father couldn't have joined you?
What?
Your father couldn't have joined you?
My father joined us at the end of the year for Pesach, and then he did his buying in America for the store. And by then my mother was fine. So that was the story there.
So, and did you remain, or did you go back
No, then we went back to the Philippines for my senior year, which was a glorious year for me. I was involved in the newspaper, and I was involved in running the school, and it was wonderful. It was a beautiful year to end. And I had made up my mind to go to college. Now, I left out the most important story. The most important story goes back to 1946, where we are having a Pesach Seder in the stadium, so that all the American soldiers who had come to liberate the Philippines and were still stationed there could attend. And the next day we had to go to shul, and our shul had been destroyed. So the congregation made a deal with the, I forget, not the Universalists, a denomination that had a church that was not decorated.
Maybe Protestant?
It was a Protestant church, but it was not Universalist, Unitarian.
A Unitarian.
It was a Unitarian church. And the job that we had as kids was to help set up for the shul. We schlepped the Torah cabinet and had a tablecloth to cover the bima and so forth. And we were standing outside waiting for the chaplain to conduct services. And no chaplain. And my aunt said, can somebody daven? We're going to lose, people are going to leave if we don't start services. The same aunt that was always active, that's Lottie's mother. And the GI said, I can conduct services. And then she says, can you lane? And he says, I'll read the Torah too. And when this young man did his job very, very well, services were over, he came out and saw that there was a group of young people who were immigrants. Who are you? What are you? And we explained to him. And then he said, I have a Jeep, I want to go take a ride. I said, no, my mother is working and tonight is the second night. I have to go home and help prepare for the second Seder. And that man became my husband.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes, he says that after my declaration that I couldn't come and so forth, he wrote his mother, I think I found my future wife today.
That's incredible.
And he was a brilliant person and a person who was goal-oriented. And from the day he left, he wrote me every single day. And that we got married. I came to the States. I went to Barnard College for 2 years, and then we got married. I continued my studies at the University of Chicago, and his first job was in Chicago. So that was our life.
And Mark, can I just ask you, in the Philippines, did you have any Jewish any services during on Shabbat or during the holidays?
Of course. Lottie and I, we loved our Bet Knesset very much. We had a beautiful, I don't know if I have a picture of it at all.
This was in Manila.
This was my mother after she came back.
This is still in...
After she came back from her surgery. But I'm looking here. Here is my husband.
So can we show these pictures? It's so... You are over here in the picture?
Yeah.
So this picture was still in Germany?
Yes. That's when we were still allowed in the parks.
That's amazing. And how old were you in that picture?
Excuse me?
How old were you? You must have been...
I must have been 4, maybe. And then this is my husband. And here, this is the story that happened. With the army came a man whose name was Nissan Sheinin. And Nissan Sheinin he was in the army also. And Nissan had been the head of Young Judea in New York. He had been the director. And Nissan had been in the army in France during the war and was stationed in the Philippines suddenly. When he arrived in the Philippines, he, as a youth person interested in youth, went to the head of the Jewish community and said, do you have any kids and teenagers? And the man said, of course, and he sent him to me. So one day a Jeep came and the man said, I introduced who he was, and we went looking for all of the kids that were in the Jewish community. We were all spread out as Manila had been destroyed. And he organized a first youth group. That was the first time I heard about Israel. We're talking of the year 1946. I'd never heard about Israel before. And he organized us. He told us news reports about what was going on here. He taught us the first Hebrew songs and dances. And we met every Sunday. We met at the community house. We had no synagogue, so we met at the community house. And this is the youth group. And we sang we were on radio singing the Shabbat melodies, the Shabbat Nigunim. And this is the youth group.
That's amazing. And the picture below?
He became He became the chaplain's assistant.
And can you tell us who's in the picture over here?
Excuse me?
Who's in the picture over here?
That's Helly Meyer. And this was Siggy and Manfred. Unfortunately, everyone is gone. This is the American Jewish soldiers got together and raised funds for the rebuilding of the Bachra Hall, part of the synagogue. And here is their event. Here are the American soldiers.
And this is in
Manila.
In Manila.
They're in the ruins of the temple.
And can I just ask, before the Japanese came, before they invaded,
before the Japanese invaded, there was a Jewish community.
And did you used to go on Shabbat?
Now the Jewish community dates way back to when the Spanish were running the Philippines for 300 years. And obviously there were Jews there. And they built the synagogue and called it Temple Emmanuel. And it was run very much according to Sephardi. There were the Abulafias and people with Spanish traditions. So there was then also there were the cigar giants from the Americas, a Jewish family, the family of, oh God, what's their name? There are movies about them. I will let you look at that movie or take it, but you need to give it back to me, I think. It will tell you about the story of how the Philippines agreed to take in the immigrants. Okay?
Oh, okay. I've heard this, yes.
Frieda, it was the family Frieda. The Frieders were also big contributors to the congregation. And Joint kept an eye also on the congregation. So they had a Mr. Netzorg, whose history I do not know, but he was head of the congregation, and he was not of the congregation, he was head of the Jewish community, separate. And then we had, until the immigrants came, there was no rabbi. Ezri Toig ran the services. Ezri Toig was a Sephardi Jew. For him, the influx of all these Ashkenazim was not that a happy moment, I think, because the Nigunim and everything came from Germany and Austria, and so the rabbi that came was, I don't remember where he came from, but we had a rabbi who was Reform, and we had a cantor who was Orthodox, Cantor Tzisner. Cantor Tzisner taught me the liturgy. Anyhow, that existed. The beautiful Temple Emmanuel existed, and it had a dome. It was very, how shall I say, Middle Eastern in its feel. But of course it was destroyed.
Now, was that shul, was it far from where you lived, or could you walk there? Was it in
we used to walk on Saturdays, and my cousin Lottie and I used to go there from school. We walked there Friday nights. We were, the two of us, I think, for 2 years. We were there every Friday night. And then Saturday mornings I would go with my father.
And your mother kept Shabbat in...
And we kept Shabbat at home.
And with regard to...
I would say we were not Shomer Shabbos at that point. But we kept Friday night, and we had Shabbat meal, and we with Kiddush and Birkat Hamazon and that.
How did you do for kosher food?
What?
For kosher food?
We did not have kosher food at that point. There were families who never gave up, but my family gave up at some point.
It must have been very difficult.
It was difficult. But there were families who stuck with it. Yes, there were.
Well, can I just ask, you have a picture of your husband?
I have to see where I can find his picture.
Or any of the other pictures?
These are pictures of my parents in America. My beloved daddy.
Is this okay?
Here he was already an elderly person. This is when the Jewish soldiers kept visiting our home.
I'll just show it. It's really special. And who's in the picture? Can I ask,
No, I don't know if I have a picture of my husband in here. Here you see this picture. We are in before the war, before the Japanese occupation. We are in our synagogue.
And where are you in the picture?
This is me, this is Lottie, and this is Werner.
So you on the right, Lottie's on the left. Wow, and this is before the Japanese invaded.
Yeah.
Was this on Hanukkah?
It must have been 1939, maybe 38 or 39. That picture.
And you have a Magen David on your blouse?
We were dressed up for a Hanukkah party. It was a Hanukkah celebration.
Yeah. It's so special. So if you have any other very special pictures.
Yeah, this is special, I must say.
And in this picture here?
This is the youth group with the chaplain.
And where are you in the picture?
Here.
With the white dress.
We called ourselves the Kvutzat Chaverim.
And can I just ask, when your father was looking for a country to go to, because until around 38 one could still go to Palestine, there were certain certificates.
Palestine, I'll tell you,
it was under the British.
I told you that at one point my parents took in boarders, and we had a Professor Levy, a pedagogic giant, who had gone to Palestine to see what it was about. And he came back to us and said, unmöglich, meaning impossible. And that was the impression that was left.
So it wasn't even an option. Yeah. And it was very difficult with the British.
Never an option. They thought of Argentina, but never.
And in this picture...
This is me when I was without my mother.
Oh.
And my father caring for me.
This is you as a...
Ken!
So, Margo, this is a picture of your grandparents, your father's parents. And what were their names?
Max and Charlotte.
And this was taken, this is from Germany?
Yes. This was in Thorn. Or Labishine, I don't know where this picture came from.
And then you have
but this man lost this wife in the birth of my father. They went to Shoah to celebrate my birth, my father's birth, and she bled to death at home. So this man married again, a wife. He had 3 boys. My uncle Lottie's father and Uncle Leo and my father. And she passed away in birth of my father. The poor man married again, and he married a wife that had cancer. And she loved the boys to death and spoiled them and gave them everything under the sun. And then she passed away, and the 3 boys were again without a mother. And then came the 3rd shidduch, and that's the grandmother I talked about. So this poor man had quite a difficulty raising 3 boys, of which my father was the youngest, and Lottie's father the oldest.
And then we have a picture here. It's a wonderful picture of
Yeah, this is my aunt Lottie and me, my aunt Sabina with us.
So your mother is...
I'm here, yeah.
You are on the left, here's your mother, and this is you. And this is Lottie and Lottie's mother.
What?
This is Lottie with her mother. And it's amazing because you have at 18 months you're old, when 18 months, and 81 years, you have a most beautiful picture when you were 18 months together. You have a friend, not only were you first cousins, but you were best friends. You went through so much together, and this is in...
Yes, we were together a lot.
This is in Purim 1935. Where are you in the...
I'm the bear. Lottie is the ballet.
And this is Purim 1935.
That's in the Jewish kindergarten of Frau Wohl.
And then you have... This is you with your mother.
When we still could go to the garden.
Which was across the road from where you stayed.
Yes.
And this is a picture in 1931 of Lottie. Would you say Lottie was your best friend as well?
What?
She was not only your first cousin, but you were best friends.
We still are.
And you still are. And we found the picture of you with your husband.
That's my husband, yes. But I have much better pictures.
This is your husband.
No, this album does not have. What you might want to show is this, our first day in school.
Oh yes, very much.
Lottie and me, our first day in school.
This is your first day in school. So it's a German custom that they give, it's like a hamper, they give a
cone full of goodies. In it are writing materials and colors and candy and chocolate.
And can I ask you, this picture with the dog, is it?
Yeah, that dog lived in our house, yes.
Was it your dog?
No, not mine.
But lived in your house, if I can show. Wow.
But these are all, here is the maid that took care of me.
Oh, this is amazing. And in the picture with Lottie and you and the dog, who else is in the picture?
What? That I told you there were two brothers and two brothers. This is the daughter of one of the brothers. Okay. Their name was Suskind.
Oh, Suskind. And can we see a picture of the maid?
Here she is with me.
What, do you remember her name?
Maria.
These are really priceless pictures.
Excuse me?
They're very special pictures. These
yes, they are. This is the store my father managed and set up after the war.
And this is in Manila?
Yeah, Berg Company.
I'm going to just show. And you know, does the store still, is it still in existence?
The store exists.
To this very day?
Yeah, it has a different name, of course.
And he has a large picture of.
This is the store.
This is a very nice picture of the store. And what year was this picture taken?
This must be 1945.
It's after the war.
7, yes. This must have been 1946.
Straight after the war. That is amazing.
Let's put this back. I think maybe I will find my...
So, Margo, before the Japanese invaded the Philippines,
okay.
How was life in Manila?
My father had started to work at the Berg store. And my mother, who was a very efficient lady, soon started to work with him in the store. And things were going, and Lottie and I were at the Philippine Women's University, which sounds very elegant, but what it is, it was a women's school, starting with nursery school all the way up to the university, to the doctoral levels. So it was a very extended school. And things were going fine until December 1941, when in the middle of the night we heard explosions. And we ran to the end of our street and found the sky red, and obviously they were burning. My father immediately identified it as the airfield. Nichols Airfield of Manila had been attacked. And then all the way through Christmas, I remember it very clearly, my parents ran the store, but there was already talk of the Japanese coming to invade. And by the first week of January, the Japanese entered Manila. And shortly after that, they rounded up all the American soldiers and marched them in something that has been historically known as the Death March, because they marched them all the way to the end and then took them to the island of Bataan and Corregidor. These are the two islands that are in the mouth of the Manila Bay. And the Japanese then took over the schools and dictated all kinds of new measures as to how citizens had to behave. It was the first time Lottie and I, on our way to school, saw someone hanging from a tree. But they were not hanging by the neck, they were hanging by the arms. This was the Japanese way of punishing someone who stole. That was the first of brutality that we experienced. In our school, the Japanese took over the beautiful building, and we had to hold classes as in an old building that the school had owned. The Japanese had events to which the schools were required to attend. So they were great shows of generals, and we had to come to the central part of Manila, and it was a beautiful large space where all the schools had to assemble, and I guess they showed it as propaganda, showing how happy the people were with their occupation. There were no more cars. Lottie and I each received a bicycle, and we used bicycles to go to school. And this went on for a while, and then came an edict. The first thing that happened was that they put out a price control issue. And in the price control, they came to the store and accused my father of not keeping up to their requirements. And they took him. And they took him to a place that was known in Manila as the torture chamber, which is called Fort Santiago. And my mom came home and was crying, and said, "How can we get Dad out? How can we get Dad out?" And then she had a brainstorm. My father had served in World War I in Germany and had medals. So she took those medals and took, in those days, the only means of transportation was horse buggies. She took a horse buggy to Fort Santiago. And she started screaming at them and showed them and said, "You have my husband. Look what he has done for Germany." And you know Germany and Japan were together in that part of the war. And she was yelling and screaming. Now on the other side, it turns out My father was sitting with the generals who had made the rules about the price change, and he did the mathematics for them and showed them that they were wrong and he was right. And at that point he hears this yelling woman outside. And they then let my father go. That's to show how dangerous things were under the Japanese. In school, we were not allowed any subjects except we did a lot of handiwork, a lot of gardening. They did away with history, and one of the most moving things was the teacher closing the door and teaching us a little bit about history. I will never forget that, and that was a dangerous thing for her to do. Things went on. My parents, in the tropical heat, took their bicycles to and from the store all through this time. And then began the landing of the Americans on the island of Leyte. And when that began, things began to get very uncomfortable. Now, our home was not far from the Rizal Stadium, and in that stadium they had become Japanese military headquarters. And it was very clear that there were Japanese that were always parading in our yards. And I don't know how or why. I guess my parents had access to some information on the radio, which was not allowed. And my father said, things are going to get very bad. So he packed this camphor chest.
This is the original. This is
the chest. He packed it. You can see it's a very worn out chest. And he took it out into the outdoor terrace of the building we were living in. And the next thing that we knew is my father said we should go to bed with our clothes on, because things are bad for the Japanese. And if they're bad for the Japanese, they're going to do desperate things. And this is exactly what happened. One night, I hear glass breaking, and I look out the window and I see the garage is burning. And the garage connected two buildings. And I ran to my parents. My father had prepared very well resources, bags of food to take with us. But he lost the keys as the house began to burn. And with the lost keys, everything, sugar, oil, everything burned. And we went out, and my mother was upstairs. And they kept yelling, "Spy, spy," and wouldn't let my mother out. And then I remembered some Japanese words that I had learned, and I yelled them out. And when they heard these Japanese words, they said, "Whoa, whoa, what's going on?" And I said, "My mother's up there." And then they let my mother out as the rest of the building burned down. So the place where we lived, all the houses were burnt on, deliberately set to fire. Now my father, who was a very thoughtful person, had built a shelter, and a shelter in Manila cannot be underground because the water level is high. So he built a huge mud kind of construction that was about 1.5 meters deep in its width, and in a semicircle between two huge trees. And that was our air raid shelter. And after they burned the house, we were several families who had to live in the shelter. Now came a question of survival because everything had burned. So neighbors threw over packages of rice and stuff, and Mother and Dad, they dug until they got to water, which they boiled, don't ask me how. And we drank, that was the water that we had to drink. Now every night we had to be very, very quiet because my father, as a soldier, having been a soldier, said, you can't make any noise. So we sat one next to the other, only pinching each other. No, nothing was said. And Japanese were patrolling the yards. And my father said, if a Japanese soldier gets scared, he'll shoot. So be very quiet. So night after night we sat there until one morning a Filipino young man came from the neighborhood and said, you've got to get out. You've got to get out because they are murdering the people in the street next to yours. They are burning, and what they're doing is they're tying the people with pillows under tables, pouring gasoline, throwing a match and burning them. And you have to get out of here. And he said, I also have heard that the Americans are very close. They're coming in closer and closer. So my father said, based on what he told us, we have to get out. Now, again, because my father had been very thoughtful, each of us had a knapsack. And in that knapsack, there was medicine, there were a couple of dollars, and I don't know what else he had put up, medicine or something. So each of us had a knapsack, and with each our knapsacks on our back, we began to crawl, because this young Filipino told us the Americans were approaching from the south of Manila toward the north. And we were on our bellies crawling, this whole group from people who had burnt out of these houses. And we crawled on our bellies until we came to where there used to be a market. It was a concrete platform. And there we saw, again, helmets and what looked like camouflage helmets. And my father said, oy vey, we may have gotten into a trap. But when we got there, it was already the Americans, and saying, who are you? Where do you come from? And they were shocked to see all these civilians in front of them. And they said, do you realize you're on the front line? And he took a sergeant who took us behind the lines. They gave us their K rations as food, and he took us behind the lines, and he distributed the first K rations, which we gladly ate. I don't even know what we ate, but I know that everybody was very thrilled even to have a little piece of what he was distributing. And then they walked us to a village south of Manila. And there we found a home that had empty rooms. And we found that a room there, and that was, I remember the first night I could sleep all night long without worrying about what will be. And then a few days later, my father went around looking for a place for us to live. And he found an empty house, the house whose picture I showed you.
This house. And this house was empty.
This is the house we found.
And
we and another family moved in together.
And were you with Lottie during this time as well?
What?
Were you with Lottie during this time?
No, Lottie's family had moved. We had separated when the Japanese took over our houses, our first houses. They turned that into a Japanese army base because I explained the houses were one like the other. And we found a house in this part of near the Rizal Stadium, and my Lottie and her family went way north, over the river. There's a river, the Pasig River, that separates north and south, and they were on the north side. Now their luck was that the apartment they found was next to the concentration camp of the Americans, that the Japanese had Americans and English. And so, what you call people who come out of the planes?
Parachuters.
So American parachuters came and liberated that part of town because of the camp for the Americans. And so they were already liberated before we were.
And do you remember Manila being, you said there was the Japanese were burning the city because they realized they were losing scorched earth, that they actually wanted to just destroy.
They wanted to destroy the entire city.
And did you see it burning?
Unfortunately, I have no pictures. I gave all the pictures to my son.
But do you remember seeing the city burning?
If you look up, if you want to know, and look up the Battle of Manila, you will see what it was all about.
I've seen pictures,
Yeah.
But do you remember seeing the city being burning?
The sky was, when we were in the air raid shelter night after night, the sky was red. Red because they were burning street after street and murdering and sexually abusing women, and it was a very, very bad time.
Why do you think they did it? Why, if they knew they were losing, why burn down the city?
Why? Why did Germany do what it did?
Yeah.
Why do people do what they do? People are very cruel. People can be very cruel, even we. Mind me.
Yeah. It's true. It's we have to learn. We have to learn from
With
all.
the right story, you can become cruel.
So can I ask, when you saw the Americans,
What?
you must have been overjoyed when you realized you were with the Americans.
Well, as I said, it was the first night that I could sleep for I don't know how long. That I could sleep and know I was safe.
And how soon after that did the Japanese leave the island? And
What?
how soon after, when you saw the Americans, did the war end and the Japanese?
Oh no, the battle for Manila, we were liberated in February, and the battle in Manila ended in June.
So it still went on.
Because the Manila has an old city, which is the first city, old city that the Spanish still built. And they holed up in that city and didn't want to give up. So there was door-to-door fighting for a long time. For a long time. And what was funny was the house that we got ourselves into,
this one.
this home, yes, had a basement. And the basement was empty. And a captain an American captain came to my father and said, "We need housing for the 5th Camera Combat Unit. Would you house them? We will bring you water and we will bring you food stuff in return for you letting our 5th Camera Combat be there." And that was fantastic because we had no water. I used to have to walk a block to carry 2 pails of water to get us water, which we didn't have. And we lived by a kind of artificial light and candles. And they brought us back, all the things that we needed at that point. So we had, and the 5th Camera Combat Unit stayed until the end of the battle, which was, as I said, continued from when we were liberated in February, continued right through June.
And you remember when the liberation came after June? Do you remember?
No, we personally felt liberated when we came into American soldiers. But the entire city wasn't clean of occupation until June, July of 1945. So it was a harrowing experience, but we survived.
And when did you see your cousin Lottie again?
I don't remember when we were able to see Lottie again. I know it was a very big event, but I don't remember the day when we were reunited. And Lottie had her own stories and experiences with the Japanese, of course. So that was our story. And Lottie's family, shortly, I think we were liberated in 45. In 1946, they left for the United States. But my father had this dream, because he saw the place burning night after night, and he said, after the war we will be one of the first stores to open, and he did, because people needed everything.
And he didn't want to immigrate to the States as well?
What?
Your father didn't want to immigrate to America as well?
No, he saw that he had a good basis for a huge business. He did very well.
You had very special parents, very insightful.
I had very special parents, both.
But, yeah.
Both mother and father were two very unusual people, and I'm unfortunately their only child, or maybe fortunately.
Wow.
So anyhow, that was that. And as I said, the American soldiers were with us, and then came Passover, and I met my future husband. It was a beschert, as we say.
It really was beschert.
Really beschert.
And here is here's a picture of your husband. And you were married for?
Yes, we were married in 1951.
And then?
And I began studying before we were married, and I continued until I had my master's degree.
Where did you get your degree?
I was 2 years at Barnard, and then I transferred to the University of Chicago, where I got my master's degree in early childhood education. And by then I was married, of course. So that was the end of the Japanese story.
And here's a picture of your, this is...
And then I met this wonderful Lionel Kestenbaum.
And you were married for...
and we were married 20 years.
Sure. So I just want to thank you so much. It's just been absolute unbelievable to hear your experience. I want to just show you, and I want to thank you, and I just want to also give you, this is a wonderful a joint.
I want you to know that that I got an invitation just now. We have been in contact, I have been in contact with the consulate, and they wanted me to come to the tree lighting.
Oh, very nice.
And so I wrote them, at this point for me to get around is not easy.
But when you went back to the Philippines, it must have been...
I have been back 3 times.
And was it very emotional going back?
It was very, very much so. I'm trying to remember. The first time was a multi thing. there was a reunion of our high school. There was a reunion of our Jewish, all the Jewish kids that had survived were together. It was a very special event, and it was, what I didn't mention is it was, I finished my studies in Manila at the American School, American International School, and that was an event. So that was the first time I went back, and I took with me my grandson and my granddaughter. My grandson, who does filming, and if you want to know a film, he's got hundreds and hundreds of meters of film of me. He's waiting to see what to do with it, but he has filmed me in every way, and he accompanied me the first time. And then the second time I went, I'm trying to remember what the second event was. I don't know. The second event, I went for an event of my grade school. And they had me come and speak to them, and I told them of how wonderful they had been when I was at the Philippine Women's University. So that was my second trip, and my grandson was with me again. And the third time I took my biological kids. By then everybody is married. So I just took the biological children to Manila. And we did a whole thing there of revisiting all the places they'd heard about. So we'd been back 3 times, and each time, I must say, the people at the Philippine Women's University were just angelic. They are so warm and so friendly and just wonderful.
So this is a joint issue that Israel did with the Philippines, and it was issued both in Manila and in Israel, in Jerusalem and in Manila.
This is in Rishon LeZion.
Yeah, in 2015 with it's so lovely. It's a stamp of the Philippines and a stamp of Israel, the same stamp.
Yeah.
And it's just to show the gratitude. When
Effie was given the job, he came to visit, and we had dinner with him, and he wanted to know all about the Philippines and about who was still there.
He was the Israeli ambassador.
Effie was a wonderful, wonderful ambassador. I adored him. He was wonderful. And he fell in love with a woman there.
Really?
And he divorced his Israeli wife and married her.
Sure. So this is a little gift for you. It's very nice. It's a souvenir leaf.
Thank you so very much.
And I would like to ask you, what you've gone through.
Lovely.
And what you've experienced, what can I ask, what message do you impart? What message do you impart to your children and grandchildren? You've seen so much, and you've been through so much. So what message do you give to the future generations?
You know, at my age, 92, people ask questions about the meaning of life. And I think my parents have been the teacher. Viktor Frankl, who is a survivor, has said it the best way, that the meaning of life is what you give to it. And that, to me, is a very important message in terms of how we live our lives and the choices we make.
That's beautiful. And your choice to come live in Israel?
The choice to come to Israel was, I think, born out of, you see, the husband that I met and married, my first husband, he had been to Israel as his family came to Israel in 36, but his mother couldn't take it and had a brother in America, so they went to the States. But my husband knew Hebrew and loved Israel very deeply, and it was clear. And after I had the baptism from Norman Shainin about Israel and all it stood for, as a person who had run from Germany and then run from the Japanese and just was ready to go to a place that could call my own.
And this is your home?
And this is where we landed, yes.
And I have to ask you, have you ever been back to Germany?
What?
Have you ever been back to Germany?
Yes, I have.
Was it difficult to go back?
No, it was not. It was, with Germany, the relation is a love-hate relationship, because what you experience as a child in terms of surroundings, smells, tastes, stays with you always. And going back to that, and you come back to the memories, and then you say to yourself, but I'm not allowed to love this anymore. I can't. You understand?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
And did you ever go to Japan, or did you have any desire to visit Japan?
I think in my heart I have appreciated Japanese aesthetics and art, but I personally did not want to go there. The smells would bring back too many bad memories. I did not.
But I think your message of Viktor Frankl, you've lived that life. It's not a message. You lived that life. You made the most out of everything, and
yes,
your parents.
But so did my parents.
Yeah,
and they were my teachers.
And what amazing people to leave Germany when it was so uncertain, and it was a sacrifice. They really sacrificed to go to a third world country, really. But it saved their lives, and thank God you're here, and for the future generations.
Right.
So I want to thank you so much, and
you
I just want to
welcome.
I wish I'd made this stream to 120 plus.
I want to tell you that I have told my story quite a few times, and it's like I've lived several lives.
Yeah.
I must be like a cat.
But you know, it is so. There are no words to describe, because what you went through, it's harrowing, but it's also incredible to see the hope and it's min hashamayim that you had miracles. You really had miracles, and thank God you're alive, and you should just be well and enjoy your family and have nachas and in good health.
No, I am very, very lucky. I was an only child. And I'm going to have my 10th great-grandchild born any minute.
Oy, mazel tov, mazel tov.
You know,
Yes.
I think that if I had not come to Israel, I would not have that kind of a family.
Yeah.
I have a beautiful extended family now, and I'm very blessed.
Well, we are blessed to have you, and you should just be well, and I'd may stream with all of Hashem's blessings.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.